of a very well-received panel that our Southwest Fire Cap initiative that I described a little earlier today, and our Cultural Burning Roundtable specifically sponsored at the International Association of Wildland Fire workshop or science conference that was held in Pasadena, California in May. And we had submitted a presentation for a session, or a proposal for a session rather, and we got elevated to a keynote panel, and it was really well received that we have Canadian colleagues that picked up the recording and used it in a podcast called Good Fire. Some of you may know that. Amy Christensen, who's a real fabulous leader in and of herself, particularly in Canada, really talking about the concept of good fire from the Indigenous perspective. So tonight, we're really honored to have this panel of really outstanding early career researchers that are focused on cultural fire. And each one of them is a star. And I really think that, as a community of practice, as potential employment opportunities come around to keep our eye on our really outstanding youth and these earlier career researchers that are stepping up to the plate with their energy, their motivation, and their passion and commitment to doing the good work. So that is my introduction to this outstanding panel, and we'll get started. So we have 4 researchers and another on the panel, on the screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each of them by name, and then they'll tell you where they're from, who they're representing, and then spend about 5 minutes apiece discussing or telling you about some of the work that they're doing. We'll then open it up for some audience questions, and then wrap things up, hopefully around 7 o'clock or so. So first up, we have Melinda Adams from the University of California, Davis. Take it away, Melinda.
Sean. Thank you, Carolyn. Melinda Adams. Good evening. My name is Melinda Adams. I belong to the San Carlos Apache tribe in what is now known as Arizona, matrilineally. And patrilineally, I also belong to the Tohono O'odham Nation in Arizona as well. I'm a PhD candidate at UC Davis, and prior to beginning my PhD journey, there I graduated from and subsequently was professor and chair at Haskell Indian Nations University, one of the 37 tribal colleges located out throughout the United States. My mother also worked at and always toted me along at SIPI, Southwestern Indian Polytechnic Institute. These majestic Sandian mountains has cradled me growing up, and the mighty Ryokan helped shape my intertribal worldview that I carry with me today. It's a joy to come home and share a little bit with you about what I know about fire, what I've learned and unlearned about fire, with the hope that it can aid in land keeping and land care here in New Mexico and beyond. As those here know, and as we heard a few times today, New Mexico made headlines this past spring due to the swath of wildfire the state experienced with the Hemet's Peak, McBride, Nogal Canyon fire, which sounded a state of emergency. Personally, my heart ached for relatives and friends of the surrounding pueblos struggling to receive aid and assistance in evacuating our most vulnerable community members. In California, where we all study and research, 2 bills driven by the input of cultural fire practitioners were passed at the end of 2021. And this fire season will be the first to document how successful these policies are played out on the ground. Here in New Mexico, state legislation passed the Prescribed Burning Act, which establishes a negligence standard for any prescribed burning on private lands and proposes a training program through NMSU for landowners to conduct burns. Apologize, I didn't even get my slides. Oh. This is a picture of one of our CAL FIRE government collaborative training programs. And this is lighting one of our culturally significant plants and using it for ignition. So one of the key differences that separates what we're terming cultural burning, good fire, traditional fire, in opposition to, maybe, but also along the same lines of prescribed or controlled fire. So to combat the acreages and homes lost to wildfire, and in an act of cultural sovereignty, cultural fire practitioners in what is now known as California are reclaiming this generational practice and are finding ways to work with agencies to do so. This picture to the, all of the pictures to the left is one from the first ever one of the first ever CAL FIRE cultural fire trainings held at the Cache Creek Conservancy, which is a place where I have a set of research and have formed partnerships and friendships with the cultural practitioners there. Attended by on-the-ground CAL FIRE firefighters, agency participants took a step back from fire suppression and instead learned how cultural fire demonstrations can differ from prescribed fire. A picture of our first ever Wetland Island burn even captured the attention of CNN News, whose piece on cultural fire in California was led by a drone shot of our burn. Trainings such as these are integral, as we all are doing the work to decolonize our approach to fire and indigenize our climate adaptation strategies. The image to the right, taken 2 weeks apart, captures the regeneration of one of the culturally significant plants my work concentrates on, a reed wetland species named tule. Part of the eco-cultural restoration work with Potwin Southern Windtune peoples, and what is now known as California, involves this plant relative, along with those, 3 others used for basketry, cordage, and materials to assemble watercraft. Through a combination of empirical plant and soil ecological readings, including nutrients, carbon, and water holding capacity, these data points are included in a proposed good fire eco-cultural matrix to aid in welcoming fire back to Potwin homelands. I'm excited to add a soil health approach to the growing literature on cultural fire with specific regard to how good fire, low intensity, low severity, and TEK-led fire benefits weathered and degraded soil profiles. It is also prudent for good fire researchers to pay close attention to the potential of soil horizon work, since there are increasing concerns on issues such as what we learned about today, soil loss, erosion, and floods due to wildfire. So we're seeing some positive effects. I don't have quite the write-out or the graphics to show you in a short amount of time, but these fields, ecological field observations have taken place for 1 year. We've done cultural burning for 3 years at this particular research site, and what the interval data is telling us with soil response as well as plant response to good fire is that it's building this soil profile's water holding capacity, so we're seeing an increase in our soil readings, which is exciting. We're seeing the nutrients being replenished and cycled through in shorter time intervals, so there's also promising work with this good fire amendments. And then there's long-term potential for this use of cultural fire for carbon storage, particularly because it's a carbon-based nutrients that's being added with the physical and chemical responses in fire, but also with the grassland species as they have more efficient water usages in aiding in storing the carbon. One way tribes have pushed forward legislation is that they've taken the lead on numerous prescribed burn networks, educating government actors and leading treks or training exchanges. Further, the stewardship is a time-honored tradition invoking the environmental and community wellness Indigenous peoples' ancestors, my ancestors, had the forethought and organization to create, uphold, and pass on. This work is important because, as one of our cultural fire practitioners, Chairman Ron Good of the North Fork Mono shares, it's not just about the fire. There's so much more consideration that this practice reawakens that touches far beyond ecological restoration or fuels reduction. Our climate models need to include expertise, as we learned today, beyond physical, chemical, and biological mechanisms and grids. We must also include our stories, songs, and languages as Indigenous and Native peoples, as these were the mediums to which our peoples shared knowledge, lessons, and lifeways. I'm almost done, I promise. Moreover, each of us in attendance today, we all have a role to play in this gathering and through this panel specifically. So tribal kin, agency representatives, allies, I call on you. I call on you to reverberate the work that we're all doing here collectively in this space to decolonize our approaches to climate adaptation and repairing our worldview of and relationship with fire. We each have a responsibility in lighting this path forward for our commitment to our lands, our waters, our more than human kin, and of course our next generation. So Ashon, thank you. I look forward to questions and conversation.
Okay, so next up we have Carlie Dominguez. And her protege, Sonora, and so who is really getting very used to attending these kinds of gatherings.
Hi everyone, nice to see you. Buenos tardes. Haku haku. It's good to see you all today. Yeah, I just want to take a moment and getting the tech up there. So this is just some introductory information. As I said, my name's Carlie. I'm Chumash and Mexican as well. And so is Sonora. We both are doing our doctoral studies at UC Davis in Native American Studies. And just recently, this is a little bit of the introduction. Recently we were able to participate in one of the TREX trainings, and it was actually Indigenous women's training up in Karuk territory, so that's like Northern California. And right here you can see we're on the outside of the fire line here. We have our basketry practitioners with us, and you might be able to see it, but I'm carrying Sonora right there. So they were extremely supportive in having a baby present, and it was just wonderful to be a part of a group of people that really wanted her there as well. More than supportive, they wanted her there. And so you can follow KWTrex on Instagram right now if you would like to stay updated. I'm going to talk a little bit about my work as an NRDW, Natural Resource Workforce Development Fellow with the Southwest CASC. Not this year, it was a year ago, and so that's an interdisciplinary science fellowship. Maybe some of you are in it. Oh, cool. And of course, Greg's here. It's good to see you. We spent the year together creating an interdisciplinary science project, and right away, I noticed I was kind of the only social science humanities person in the house, and I felt really encouraged because folks were like, social science is our science as well, social science too, you know? So I felt empowered to be in my social science methodology, but underlying all social science methodology is kind of real lived experience, so in academia, we have to be like, this is the methodology we use, and it's backed up by X person and Y person, and that's true, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. But I just want to talk about one of the products that we did from this fellowship together, and really stemmed from scientists who were really, they wanted to engage with stakeholders. That's kind of the natural resource language, is engage with stakeholders. And in my mind, I always see this like building community, so there's like a little bit difference there, but it's the same thing in a lot of ways. But I'm bringing this up because the scientists were really open to learning about native science or indigenous science. This takes time, it takes meetings, it takes one of our fellows having a relationship already with Karuk tribe. It takes, and the Southwest CASC also, or I'm sorry, the Northwest CASC, I think has the relationship with Karuk already. So there had already been pre-established relationships to move this collaboration forward. And after a series of conversations a few of the fellows had with Karuk, Department of Natural Resources, one of the ways that they thought that they could really allow or like support, uphold indigenous science was allow indigenous people, Karuk people, to talk about their science, right? So the solution was to have a podcast. So on any of your podcast platforms, we're really excited. The podcast just really launched like 3 weeks ago, a month ago maybe. So you can listen to it in your airport. You can, when you go home, you can listen to it tonight. I think you'll really, I hope if you're interested in native science, cultural burning practitioner, you'll really enjoy this podcast. It really warms my heart, and especially during fire season when there's a lot of doom and gloom sort of talk. This is very grounded and helpful. So that was a podcast, and it took over 2 years to get out. So these kind of projects take time, right, to get the projects out. And I guess I'll go to the next slide. And, I didn't mention in my first slide, but I often use the term good fire. So that might mean cultural fire, that might mean prescribed fire with cultural objectives. But for me, good fire is like when the people have a good relationship with fire and land and plants and water. And it's a whole ecosystem cares situation, that isn't really, it's not steeped in Western academic American science. It comes from place-based tribes. So that's a little bit about good fire. And here, in this slide, I'm talking a little bit about the academic methodology that I use and will continue to use to uphold indigenous voices, right? There's the Indigenous Research Agenda put forth by Linda Tiawi Smith. And she really focuses on self-determination. She talks about processes. Everything is a process, and so I appreciate her approach because we're looking at the process. We're not just looking at an end result. So I think that's really helpful when working with, I've also worked with too much people. It's just helpful to have maybe an idea of what you want to produce, but to allow practitioners or allow collaborators to tell you what they want, right? And the Indigenous Research Agenda allows us to do that. And it also accounts for all the colonized violence that happened in research and everything like that, too. Indigenous Story Work by Joanne Archibald that basically, says that in Indigenous people's science or Indigenous people's stories, and she's talking about the Solo Nation, that stories harbor the data. Stories is where we find this information, right? And in closing and looking forward, we have a concept called Indigenous maturity, which exists beyond academia. It's not just in academia by any means. But it's this idea, it might be different from what you're used to, or it might be what you're used to, because I'm actually kind of used to Indigenous maturity, which is where we see Indigenous people as leaders, as getting the results they want. It's a world where we are burning because the basket weavers need fire. We are burning because we need the acorns from the oaks that they're healthy. That's some examples of Indigenous maturity, and I really appreciate Laura Harjo, who's a Muskogee Creek scholar. She talks about Indigenous maturity. So looking forward, the podcast will be continued by the Karuk Department of Natural Resources, and just recently in Chumash Homelands and Home Waters, we'll be talking about, or we'll be starting a project called Cycles of Renewal, where we'll be revitalizing good fire in Chumash Homelands. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carlie and Simona. Yes. Up next, we have Denise Martinez, also from UC Davis, PhD student.
Hi everyone. So again, my name is Denise Martinez, and I'm a descendant of Dominguez people, and also, I don't know if you heard that. Okay. My name is Denise Martinez, and I'm a descendant of Dominguez people. I'm also mixed race Mexican, and I'm a PhD candidate in ecology at Davis. I focus on environmental justice and governance, and so I'm a first-generation immigrant to the United States and grew up in fire-prone Northern California in Shasta and Caduce homelands. And it was really, these communities where I first learned, my lessons in fire, good and bad. And also, these communities that taught me to love my Indigenous identity. I think that's something we don't talk about enough, is that working on the land, even if you're not working with your own community, can really help your self-identity, your well-being as an Indigenous person. And so that's always something I like to shout out the Caduce tribe for. So, there's my title slide. Okay. So I really only have 5 minutes, so I'm just going to give y'all a little introduction into my work. As a PhD student, I have a dissertation, and it really is based on the work that I've done throughout my career working with cultural fire practitioners in various capacities. Some of that work includes the work we do as a team, like the cultural fire workshops. But for my dissertation, I've been specifically doing kind of a deep dive into collaborations and decision making, and we have been doing in-depth interviews with cultural fire practitioners and their collaborators throughout the state of California. Really just trying to understand how power works in collaborations, and a lot of times, that is something you might see from the outside, but it really is in those experiences, those interactions, the way that, like a tribal member might, feel in meetings. Do they feel that they can bring up issues that are important to them? Do they feel listened to? Do they feel heard? And so a lot of my interviews kind of center around that, and also the practical process and logistics and collaborations. And so you might be asking yourself, why governance, or maybe not, because this group is very cool. So, I think in my time as a field tech, I was doing a lot of data collection for the Caduce tribe, and then just as a student, I got to be kind of a fly on the wall and hear collaborations between tribes and agencies, and just seeing how the interactions can be really painful, they can be really generative, and they can be energizing. They can shift the paradigm, or they can support the status quo. And really, a lot of why something might be positive, or why something might be really challenging, is in how people decide to interact in those collaborations, and what are the structures that people are putting in place to make sure that collaboration happens equitably. And just, really thinking about, hi Simona, just really thinking about how every decision that we make when it comes to natural resource management is a value statement. And so if we're not bringing people into that space equitably, if we're not sharing power, then we're only putting forward a specific set of values, and that's problematic. And so as I'm working on my dissertation and, doing the pre-qualifying exam thing where I was reading a ton and just really diving into the literature and starting to do my interviews throughout the state, the question that kept coming to me is, how do we create decision-making or governance structures that take us beyond just like not, beyond avoiding crisis. So by that I mean, avoiding crisis is great, but we also have a lot of other visions and dreams about what a future could look like, and that is, you know, a lot bigger than just avoiding crisis, right? And so how are we making decisions today that take us to that future, that vision that we all want to see come to light? And so in the state of California, I got the opportunity to work with Beth Rose on the Science Advisory Panel for the Forest Management Task Force for California. I'm trying to like spell out all the acronyms. But it was a really great opportunity to be in a room with other scientists, who was also one of the few social scientists in that space. And I got to think about, okay, this is one way that we could do that for how we evaluate forest health grants in the state of California. And so I proposed this rubric, which I can't get all the way into, but it grades projects on whether they're doing adequate partnership building. Are they providing funding for communities that aren't going there as a part of their job? Are they having facilitators and structured decision making? Are projects a part of a long-term commitment to a place? You know, when you think about tribes, that is the longest term commitment, and that's so important. It's part of the reasons why tribes are so successful, the work that they do. And then the third, I guess, grading part of the rubric is building local capacity. Are the projects that we're funding building our capacity to do more in the future? And then the last is, are we respecting tribal and traditional ecological knowledge? Are we uplifting tribal leaders? Are we making sure that we have data sovereignty? And all of these, I propose that they be used to grade grants for work on the ground. And so we're still talking to decision makers about using it, but I think I got excited about trying to answer this question, and I'm excited to hear what you all think about this question too. Thank you. And now I'll pass it to Will, who is on Zoom.
Thank you, Denise. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, people can hear you. Sorry, Will. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm sharing my screen now. Me and Wetland Island, wanted to just share a quick presentation with you titled The Effectiveness of Indigenous-Led Collaborations Between Tribes and Agencies in the Alliance. Connected to William Jr. I introduce myself in my Kuya language. Kuya Nation is a tribe from Southern California. We have about 12 reservations here in Riverside, San Bernardino, and San Diego counties. I currently reside in San Diego County on the Palma Indian Reservation. So I'm a member of the Kuya Band of Indians, and I'm also Luiseño. I'm a PhD student at UC Riverside, and I also teach Native American Studies, California Indian History. And in addition, I have an additional role as a Tribal Capacities and Partnership Program Manager at the nonprofit Climate Science Alliance. And so my presentation will be just a snapshot of some of the projects that we're doing in the communities, partnering with the communities and supporting their work around restoration, forest management, and ceremonial putting fire back on the land. So what I'd like to do is just for a second here, merge from the PowerPoint to a very nice piece of scholarship that I came across not too long ago. I hope you can see this. It's from the Journal of California Great Basin Anthropology. It was just published this year. Putting Fire on the Land, the Indigenous people spoke in the language of ecology and understood the connectedness and relationship between land, water, and fire It was put forth by esteemed elder Ron W. Good, who many of my colleagues have worked with in person. I still have yet to meet him in person. I look forward to that. He's North Fork Mono and a burner and an elder. And so he collaborated with Stephanie Beard and Christina Oraftik on this. And I just wanted to just quickly pay attention to one section and just read it with you. Until fire suppression was instituted in the early 1900s, the Mono did put fire on the land on a constant basis. Following suppression and oppression, the North Fork Mono went underground, burning only on their private lands, i.e. public domain allotments, which the Newham had 52 historically, plus the Rancheria and their Williamson agricultural lands. Even there on the private lands, they managed to get into trouble with the local authorities when they tried to burn their cultural resources. This created a problem culturally as the materials used for making baskets were no longer healthy, prospering plants or shrubs. If you cannot put fire on land, plant resources, the resource is never renewed. The roots get smaller in size and length, and the root plants bunch up without proper harvesting and tilling. Therefore, during the 20th century, tribal cultural practices diminished as well. So I wanted to just share that with you, and hopefully you can have access to this very good scholarship. It's an exciting time for educators like myself, my colleagues, to see more and more scholarship coming out from the renewal of traditional practices, from true experience, putting fire back on the ground, whether you call it good fire or prescribed fire, ceremonial fire. It is all, part of the resurgence and really like a prophecy that our people have seen. And I know that my colleagues talked about futurity, Carlie talked about futurity. And so this is the futurity that was seen in the past by our ancestors, and now it's coming into fruition. I feel it's really exciting. So I will share, if we go back to the PowerPoint. All right, I'm gonna get through this really quick. So the Climate Science Alliance is a nonprofit out of San Diego, I mentioned. We've been around for about 7-8 years now. The mission of the Alliance is to safeguard natural and human communities in the face of climate change, including resources, water, etc. Try to create real partnerships to increase awareness around climate change impacts, promote healthy, viable, and sustainable solutions, and facilitate action. So if you get a chance, please check us out at climatesciencealliance.org. One of our most prolific programs is the model and action of our tribal working group, where we have over 30 tribal nations and up to 100 now individuals who are both native professionals in the fields of environmental science, environmental protection, cultural resource protection, emergency management, and tribal council leadership as well. In addition to that, we have partnered with our land practitioners, meaning our elders, who are out there on the land every day and are retrieving that knowledge from the earth and the plants and transferring it to the next generation. 7 generations, right? And so the tribal working group is a group that needs to assess the needs of the community, immediate needs of the community, in order to create a healthy maturity for our tribal communities in Southern California. So a couple of our most proudest moments recently are the culmination of the Climate Science Alliance and Polytribe Wildlands Fire and Forest Management training that we just had earlier this year in conjunction with the Native Wildlands Fire Training. So we took approximately 30 tribal members from different tribes around Southern California, Arizona, and also Mexico. And we brought fire practitioners, traditional practitioners, together with our fire chiefs and burn bosses, key agency people from the U.S. Forest Service, as well as CAL FIRE. And we have two of our most prominent teachers here. This is Wesley Ruiz Jr., who's a member of the La Jolla Band of the Luiseño Indians here in Southern California. He is a retired fire chief and burn boss from the Forest Service, and now serves as his tribe's fire chief for the fire department. This one on the right is Dr. Stan Rodriguez, who is a mentor to many of us. His work on Kumeyaay histories and epistemologies, as well as Kumeyaay fire practice and the meaning of fire was shared with our trainees, which they very much enjoyed over a whole day of outdoor educating our trainees on the land, connecting them to the land, and coupling that with native origin stories about fire and about how the land was created and maintained by our ancestors. So, in addition to that, we wanted to instill a very a philosophical kind of way of keeping our people in tune with what we're learning, trying to better absorb what we're learning, and coming back to traditional fire practices. And so we use language that can be interpreted in various ways pertaining to fire practice. So the word for hello in the Kumeyaay language was told to us by Dr. Stan Rodriguez is being translated to literally saying, how is the fire burning inside of you today? And so subsequently, more conversation in Kumeyaay would be addressing each person's individual fire inside of them, meaning their spirit, meaning something that needs to be cultivated and taken care of. And so our approach to renewing, bringing back, rejuvenating, I should say, the fire practices on the land in Southern California, native tribes, has to do first and foremost with epistemic knowledge and ontological knowledge resurgence and transfer. And that includes language learning, traditional songs, traditional stories, and so forth, to inform scholarship, to generate new scholarship written by California natives. And so I hope to be contributing to that very soon, culmination of my dissertation. And so my work at the Climate Science Alliance allows me to inform my work, obviously, and gain this new experience as we move forward as one community, both with the agencies, the non-Indian agencies and agents, and as well as our own fire practitioners, our own teachers, Native Studies professors. All of these folks are involved to contribute to the work that we've started and continue to see forward as a partner with tribes and the Climate Science Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Speaking to us from San Bernardino County in Southern California. Thank you, Will. Nina Fontana is going to wrap things up for us this evening. She is, we're proud to call her our Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center Fire Climate Adaptation postdoc. You'll hear just a touch about that in a second. She is co-supervised by Beth Rose Middleton, that is here today. And of course, many of her students are up here as well. And with Hugh Stafford, who was unable to be here today as he is working in Peru. Nina.
Thank you for the warm introduction. My name is Nina Fontana, and part of being a postdoc in this position is listening to the leaders leading the way in Indigenous cultural fire. And so when we think about fire management, it's important to think about all aspects. And I know you can't see this, but I'm just going to highlight some of the main takeaways of today. So we started out with Melinda really talking about Indigenous-led ecology and environmental monitoring and what that really looks like. And then we sort of began to also think about Indigenous storytelling and the research agenda with Carlie and looking at interagency collaborations. Denise she definitely talked about governance and equitable decision making and what that looks like, or what it could look like, which is really, really important. And then Will spent only a few minutes talking about some of the big collaborative work that he's doing in Southern California. And so all of this really informs the bigger picture in the formation of a national synthesis, which I, along with 6 other postdocs, are going to do, or attempt to do. And one of the big questions that we're looking at is how are the sociocultural and biophysical contexts for fire stewardship being affected by climate change? And that's a big question. There's a lot of elements to it. So the regional case studies are going to synthesize this gradient of intentional fire use in the US and what that actually looks like. We have 3 case studies. There's going to be a cultural burning focus, which I think is really important when we are reminded that Indigenous communities steward over 80% of the world's biodiversity. It's a really important thing when we're thinking about futurities and what that looks like. The future of fire includes Indigenous futurities. And I think I'm going to leave it at that because I believe we are very close to 7.
All right. Thank you so much, Nina, for wrapping that up for us. And I want to say, too, that Nina, just at the end of our SWAP programming today, talked about her dissertation research with an Indigenous community from the Ukraine, and the 3 years that she spent learning and trying to understand and sharing many cultural aspects while also studying the ecological and physical features of the landscape, this beautiful landscape in the western mountains of the Ukraine. It's very touching. It was a really moving story, too, that was really relevant to what we're talking about in terms of this worldview, that it's informed by Indigenous knowledge globally. So thank you all so much for really doing this reprise of this panel. It's a little bit more reduced. We wanted to do some interaction with the group. We know that we're at the top of the hour, but I will just open it up for a couple of questions because I just feel like we'd be remiss to not let you all ask something that you're thinking about that perhaps one of these amazing emerging leaders can help you work through with you or provide their perspective on. So with that, we'll take a couple of questions. Anybody? Wow, okay. Well, I guess you all did such a great job that you answered. Oh, wait, who did I miss? Oh, hello. Okay. I also want to point out while I'm walking over to Ariel that Christina Oraftik is sitting in the audience today. She is Ron Good's right-hand woman right here. She was a contributor to that amazing article, and she's too is involved in some really terrific work. Okay.
Hello. Hello, my name is Fontana. I'm a tribal member from Cochiti Pueblo. I walked out this way to get a microphone, but it got to me another way. So my question for each of you, and first I just want to thank you all so much for the important work that you're doing and being able to demonstrate that there are so many different ways to do research. And there's so many ways to represent our values as Indigenous peoples platforms to center Indigenous values within the work. And I feel like that's just so crucially needed right now. And I get so many questions and I get so many requests from people to participate on committees, to participate in advisory councils, that there are just so many people thinking about what Cynthia Naha said earlier, like working with Indigenous peoples is so hot right now. So one of my questions is, how do you, to reflect on the question around how do you keep the fire burning within you? Like, how do you continue to do this work when there's just so much expectations, there's so much responsibilities that's being put on us as young leaders, as emerging leaders? How are you caring for yourselves in this work? And I feel like so many, I know I would benefit from hearing from that, and I'm sure so many others would too, if there's ways that we can continue to support each other.
I'll go ahead and go first, and I'll try to be brief. But first of all, Ariel, just thank you so much for being here and being so engaged. You've offered so much wisdom to us over the course of a full day and a half a day. I'm so honored to be in relation to you. I'll just put you on the spot. We actually completed the Intertribal Agricultural Council Fellowship together with a really impressive group of Indigenous PhD students that are doing research in food sovereignty, doing research in land stewardship, ethics and practice, and being connected to cultural practitioners through all of what we know of the United States. So it's an honor to meet you in person and to be here, and with all the relations that we met in this gathering. So how do we keep the fire burning? How do we keep it going? I really appreciated, I think a lot of us did, Anne-Marie Tischeli's comments from yesterday, and just talking about self-care and caring for others. I so appreciate that, and as people saw yesterday, I'm a mother too, so trying to raise a human and do this work and try to, be in academia. So many things that we are called to as Native peoples, Indigenous peoples, sharing knowledges in welcoming spaces, but also in not so welcoming spaces. It's important to acknowledge that it's not always well received, it's not always supported. So to just find the places where it is and be in community in that sense. And I will say it's kind of first reach, but a lot of the care that goes into this is part of this work. It's being on the land and having the tools that our ancestors used in carrying fire, and seeing all generations represented, my little one, Carlie's little one, elders who are finding their way back to languages and songs just like we are. It's really good for my heart, and really good for a lot of the just pressure and the discomfort that I feel sometimes when I'm in academia and when I'm engaging with agency representatives who don't always want to appreciate my worldview and the worldview of the practitioners that we work with. So I think time on the land is healing, and I think we all share a love for being on the land together. So harnessing that and sharing that amongst each other and passing that on, I think that's done a lot of good, and that's rooted a lot of the work that we all and that I try to do. So spending time on the land and listening to the songs and stumbling my way through language. Those are all lessons for my heart and lessons for the work. So I just want to thank you, Ariel.
I really resonate with what Melinda shared. I think what I'll add is that it's so important to honor relationships. And I think that's something that we say often, but I find that the time I spend slowing down, calling family, friends, really prioritizing honoring relationships in my career. So in any collaboration with another scholar, with another colleague, I really want to be a person that walks in a good way and has good relationships with the folks around me, because ultimately that community of care is, those are the people that carry me through the hard times too, And so I think for me, honoring relationships with my colleagues here, with my friends, with my family, with the practitioners I work with, and making time to invest in those relationships. And also, and by doing that, also maybe saying no to some things that don't allow me to do that or don't allow me to prioritize that has really helped me stay grounded. It's helped me have someone to take care of me when I'm going through a hard time. And I think that when I'm able to give, I love the feeling of giving to that community of care. So that's what I would add to what Melinda said, which was really great.
I really appreciate your question. It like got me in my feels, you know. What keeps our fire burning? I mean, life is so full, right? So I would say like it's love. One thing is actual like love, love for Sonora, but it has to be love for myself. And a lot of us, you know, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, like we have all kinds of relations that we're healing from, or we have good relations, we have toxic relations, like let's be real. Like, I mean, and I share that because I've gone through, I don't know, like I just want to share, I just feel like you asked such a heartfelt question. Like sometimes it looks like going to therapy and good medicine and like getting through some kind of like lateral abuse or domestic abuse or all those things come up in our communities, all of our communities, right? It's like Indigenous and non-Indigenous, you know? So keeping our fire burning through all that, looking at the stars, saying our prayers, praying with the water, every morning that water prayer, you know, that'll help. That'll keep it going for us. So it's like, and I really appreciate your question because we don't get to write about this in scholarship, and it's so critical to being able to do anything. It's like drinking water, having good relations, healing from the bad stuff we go through. And yeah, so that's where I'll go. Thank you for the question. Will, do you have a response?
Actually, my response to the question, I think that one of the ways that I've been able to kind of keep my spirit strong and the fire within me burning is to do the work on the ground, which is, you know, the traditional practices themselves. I think that folks don't realize, at least, you know, tribal community folks don't realize, you know, that they already have the knowledge inside of them to do these things, that it needs to be reawakened, that it's been dormant for 200 years of colonization. So as a historian and an educator, I love educating folks on our history. And I love reinforcing that with very, very encouraging, you know, words, very, very encouraging presentations about the work that I'm doing, the same work I shared with you all. And so I think just being here, albeit I'm there digitally with you, but I feel like, you know, when we come together for presentations and conferences and having these critical dialogues about Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous futurities, we are cultivating that fire within us. Our spirit grows stronger so that when we go back to our day jobs, we go back to the arenas that we all work in, we're able to go with a renewed sense of self-determination and collaboration, a strong spirit of collaboration. So that's what keeps my fire burning.
I'll just add, what keeps my fire burning is being inspired by people who are doing really heartfelt work. So it's connected to who they are, and it's intentional. And I also think being out on the land and seeing species that maybe haven't been there for years and years and years, but have come back as a result of fire, is also pretty darn inspiring.
Okay. Okay, yeah. All right, I think we're going to stop there because that was really such the perfect question. It really ties back to, again, the really beautiful words that we heard yesterday from Anne-Marie Chischilli from ITEP and the Northern Arizona University. She had been celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day herself and really had some beautiful words to share and really emphasize this self-care. So I think on that note of even hope and inspiration, we're going to close tonight.